So the only way to mitigate that is upfront procurement. And you can only do that. You've got to get your design correct to stage 4, so that you can actually put a bill of quants together.
If you want to buy the 50 megawatt, then say now. Then you get a good price.
Don't forget to visit, subscribe and follow our YouTube channel and Spotify Nusantara Academy, and turn on notifications to stay updated on other exclusive content.
Good morning, Indonesia. Good morning to our audience. Welcome to the second season, episode number 2 in podcast Nusantara. My name is Intan Tiara Dewi. I'm head of building products of PT Siemens Indonesia. And today I am here with two magnificent gentlemen. First is we have Mr. Chris Yates. We used to call him Pak Chris. He is the former project director at PureDC. And also secondly, we have Pak Stephanus Tumbelaka. We call him Pak Steph. He is a data center industry veteran and also the former managing director for Indonesia of Princeton Digital Group. Welcome, Pak.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Intan.
So
and
today,
welcome Indonesia.
Welcome Indonesia. Welcome to the viewers and audience. So today we will discuss about the explosion data center market in Indonesia, especially in the project construction and management, revealing what's going on behind the curtain. But before we start the fun part, do not forget to all of the viewers to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell in YouTube. Also put the comment below. Okay. So we will start to have the fun session of today's podcast. And to the gentlemen, Pak Steph and Pak Chris, according to the data, so we have a modern intelligence data and sharing about the explosion in data center construction. So hitting the CAGR rate in double digit during a quite short period, 2023 until 2029. So the market data center is quite booming. A lot of also the 11 key players from worldwide coming to open their construction in Indonesia. So for Pak Steph, with this explosion market data center construction, Pak, what kind of opportunities and also challenges risen to the rapid expansion in Indonesia, Pak?
Thank you, Intan. I'm interesting when you're seeing 11 players coming to Indonesia. Okay. Let me start with telling or sharing what is the current capacity in Jakarta and Jakarta greater area on data center capacity. At this moment is more than 100 megawatt already been built and ready to serve the market, and expected to reach almost 500 megawatt in these next few years. So there's a lot of opportunities coming to Indonesia, saying that first is of course the economic growth, giving more jobs to engineers in Indonesia, and also enable the digital transformation for all the business, because especially after the pandemic, more and more businesses is turning to digital.
Correct.
So there's a huge transformation on digital side, and the other opportunities is actually infrastructure development. Having said that, there more capacity is built in Jakarta and Jakarta greater area, meaning that there's also more infrastructure need to be built For example, like the power grid, the network infrastructures, okay, and also the accessibility to those data center sites. And not to forget that there's also opportunity for startups, for youngsters to build more and more ICT solutions that it is easier now and also cheaper. While the challenges is always there, first is managing the energy efficiency, being a data centers. That's very challenging, especially in Indonesia with tropical weather. And then also skill gaps. There's more and more difficult to find a skilled workforce, while at the same time there's more or of data center players coming to Indonesia, meaning the price competitive is going higher and higher. Sometimes it doesn't make any sense actually. Also regulatory, there's also challenges in Indonesia, issues related to land acquisition, permit taxations, compliance with international standards that our government is still developing on that side. Next is how we can have a renewable energy source to be used by the data centers players. Yeah, I stop here and pass to you.
Yes.
Thank you, Stephanus. Just a couple of things on your comments there on the skill sets over in Indonesia. I feel it's a very poor show on the government that a lot of the workforce has to come in from overseas, and I think training now is a must. So that we train on-site workers, construction workers, we give them the correct tools to work, and also I think Indonesia needs to train the design teams as well, so that they're all up to speed with the new technologies in data centers, so that you want to give the money back to the people, and we need to get the people in Indonesia working, and cut down the amount of foreign workers that are coming into it.
Yeah, I strongly agree with your comments, Chris. That's the facts in Indonesia. There's only few peoples that really understands on data centers, on delivering the data centers correctly.
Are you an engineer, consultant, or policymaker? This course is for you. You'll gain invaluable insights into the latest industry trends and best practices. Scan QR code below to register.
However, I still believe that with proper trainings, with proper, building the attitude and culture in Indonesia, actually can speed up on having more and more workforces to support on data center industry. But I also found the interesting part for our workforce in Indonesia, because I'm locally, so it's easier for me to understand those people. Actually, there's a lot of Indonesian workers. Actually, they know the knowledge, but it's a bit difficult for them to communicate. Being Indonesian, it's very shy people. So they usually not saying that or express what they are thinking in front. That's why currently, like it or not, we still need overseas expertise to come to Indonesia and help us to build this this industry.
I think Indonesians naturally are non-confrontational, and
Exactly.
and I think on the whole they need to get through that, because you can't build a data center sitting back and just taking it from everybody. They have to learn to question everything. They have to be forceful in the correct manner, but questioning everything, making sure the projects are on time, making sure that the installation is to the specification. All these will help, but Indonesia's lovely people, but they do need to get a little bit more assertive, I think, to move
and
on.
more discipline, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for the workforce, we need to skill up our game because the data centers is coming again until 2020 and refer to the data. But for your experience, Pak Chris, who is the parties that involved in this construction data centers and what they exactly do to keep up the coming new project in Indonesia?
Okay, so obviously you've got your client,
Yes,
you've got your developer,
correct.
right? The developer, obviously, they find the land. You know, they need help from the professional team to make sure they've got the correct site. Obviously, flood reports, ground reports, and everything to make sure you're in the right place. Then from there, you need your project management and cost management team.
Correct.
And those are they play a vital part because you have to get the cost right,
Correct.
and the cost forecasting has to be correct all through the project. You know, from then on, obviously there's the design and the professional team. You know, data centers are very technical buildings. As a building, it could be a shed, concrete structure, but the real work is on the technical side of it. So, you know, you need a good MEP fire consultant. They need to make sure that the design is spot on and they go into everything. And then you also need to look at how that integrates with the architecture of the building as well. You know, and there's also the environmental implications to think about. Noise, how is noise, how is wind going to affect the operation of the equipment? So you've got all the design team, your civils and your structural, and then you've also got a big part in data centers. Obviously, is the ICT, which is very, very, very important, and your security of a data center. You know. So those are important. You need a secure data center, and it works from the outside inwards. You know, we normally say there's like 10 steps to security, which is your outer perimeter fence. You know, your gatehouses, and then your inner walls, and then you go into the building. There's lots and lots of steps to security. Cameras everywhere, obviously. You've also got your health and safety team, which is very important. Indonesians are, I think, they're now coming to the table on health and safety. My experience is it was very poor before.
We need to admit it. Okay.
Yeah, I think, you know, we went through this in the West 30, 40 years ago, you know. So now we want every worker to come to work and to go home to his family every night. It is a must. And the only way you're going to do that is by training them, by advising them of the dangers of work. The workplace is a dangerous place.
Correct.
People need to be taught about the dangers. So that is a critical point as well for the workforce. We want everyone to go home safely to their families.
Correct.
You've also then got your, obviously your environmental team. They need to look at the effects of the data center on the environment, on habitats. You know, it's a big thing. It's a big data center. It consumes a lot of energy,
Correct.
a lot of power. What are the implications on the environment, not only locally but, you know, across the country? There's that to do. You've then got your permit consultants. Permitting in Indonesia, I think Stephanus will back me up here, can be a nightmare at times.
Challenging.
Challenging
topic.
Challenging, yeah. But if you get that started correctly and organised and set into the program, the build schedule, then it'll all flow nice and easy. You know, so there are ways around it, and there are ways to speed it up. Obviously, then you move to your main contractor. general contractor.
Okay.
So, your general contractor is the key role to it. The structural, civils, sewerage, drainage, the actual construction. Then you've got your MEP teams, and then also very important to a data center is your LLE, which is your long lead equipment suppliers.
Okay.
And those need to be engaged early because of the lead times and the knock-on effect of the recent pandemic that we've had. Would you agree?
Yeah. And just want to add some more, because you are saying also the importance of design, right? The professional design. What I found also that, yes, as the data center owner, we should know what is our requirements,
Correct.
and passing the message correctly to the designer. That's very important. That's the first step that we need to discuss thoroughly with the designer. However, I also found that's also a lack of maybe in the project management in our side here in Indonesia on translating the design to the sequence of work. So I found there's a lot of problems happening in the field when doing the construction, while the subcontractors was not managed correctly. So they just try to achieve their own achievement without any concern actually on the workflow or the sequence of work.
Okay.
So it's affect to the
timeline.
the timeline,
Overall?
because
Okay.
sometimes there's a lot of issues that we need to do the rework. We need to they install and then install again. Something
Reinstall
like
and
that.
install again.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that's I found that it's really very important to define a proper workflow or work of sequence in that sense. Yeah. The other one is permit.
The
Yes,
permit,
I strongly agree with you, Chris, that my suggestion is always once the data centers operator already have put commitment to enter Indonesia, that they need to start to discuss or to approach the legal advisor
Correct.
to help them on doing the permit. I know that based on also my past experience, it's a gap also between the central government compares to the local government, the local authority.
Okay.
That sometimes we found that it's not aligned, and then it will makes a delay on getting the permits and approvals. So having this advisor is really helpful.
Yeah.
But again, agree with Chris that we need to start earlier on doing and getting those permits and approvals from the authorities. Yeah.
So some of the permits is we know because some key players is coming from not from Indonesia, but so somehow we need some advisor to make sure that it can be aligned based on the timeline, right?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting point of view. And we have also the data from the structure research. So this is talking about the commercial data center market size in Jakarta, growing more than 20% on average each year. So really rapidly growing. So I want to ask Pak Steph to have a comment. So how do you perceive the evolution of this site, Pak? Especially for the construction new data center in over past 10 years.
Okay. I started from my past experience with a local IT company, and at that time we found that Indonesia requires a data center.
Okay. This is 10 years back, Pak.
10 years, more
More
than
than 10 years
actually.
back. Okay.
So we started that how actually it was started when there is a economic crisis in Indonesia. So we found that there's a need for us to help the business from the IT side on how to reduce their costs. So by having a data center, there's an expectation for cost reduction. At that time, we calculate as a 30% reduction.
Okay.
At that time, we found that the data center should be in the inner city.
Correct.
Right? But then along the way, we found that the inner city is lack of power capacity.
Correct.
The connectivity is crowded. It's not properly structured. So we are looking for Jakarta greater area. Let me also add why we choose Jakarta, because
Yeah.
most of Indonesia business stays in Jakarta area.
Yes.
In Indonesia, you can find the data. Right? And so we found that it's easier for us to build the data center in the industrial area, where the permit we also get helpful and faster, because certain industrial area already got agreement with the local government to get the permit about 4 months only. Okay. And being industrial area, there's also a ample capacity of power.
I think
So-
as the scale of data centers has grown, probably 10 years ago there might be 500 kilowatts a megawatt.
Oh.
Now you're going into 5 megawatt
Megawatts
halls,
or
Yeah.
more.
and you can't really build these in a city.
The power consumption itself is
there isn't the room. I mean, all people want to put in the cities is offices, retail.
it's getting crowded, right?
Yeah, it's getting crowded. You've also got the difficulty then with the cooling systems because of the lack of air that's flowing around it. So it's evolved through then, as you said, Stephanus, to off-site or out-of-centre sort of facilities, hasn't it? And that's where it will continue. But then as the demand grows, we may have to look further afield. You need to look at the environment. If you're going to get green and you're going to pull your PUE down, you need to look at cooler environments as well. So there's a lot of change going on, isn't there? And the data center is a rapidly growing animal. We've seen it in the West, and I can see it here now. It's going to grow, and it's going to grow at a massive rate. And people need to look at the environmental impacts on it, the power, the green power as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also
Just want also to add what Chris has mentioned. Yes, that's the green power. It's now very important for the customer. But then there's also interesting from the market perspective. Now in Indonesia, especially in Jakarta and Greater Jakarta area, yes, that the customer who is willing to have a huge capacity, they are looking for Jakarta Greater area because there's ample of capacity of the power supply over there. But there's also demand from these cloud operators for having a good experience with less latency on the networks. So they are looking for a small capacity in the inner city. So if you see now, there's also a lot of players, including the big players, data center players, build their data center in the inner city.
Okay. But in the small capacity only.
In the
right?
small capacity.
only.
Of course, it is still bigger as compared with 10 years ago. It's only maybe at the max is 1 megawatt, right? But now it's 6 megawatt, 10 megawatts in the inner city. But if you are looking more than 10 megawatts, 30 megawatts, 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts, then absolutely you will go to the Jakarta greater area.
Yeah, you're looking at data centers now that are taking more electrical power than a town. We experienced it in England. I mean, everything had to be in London. It all started in London, and they've got the M25 ring that goes all the way around London. They've got the power in London, and they've got the connectivity. But then, as the sizes of the data centres grew, they've run out of power. And now, the whole of England, the national grid network is having to be upgraded. And data centres have now moved out of central London. One, because of the cost. Two, because of the power. And now they're working on improving sort of countrywide connectivity so that data centers can be moved out into different cities rather than just in London.
As long as it's connected to each other, right? Yeah,
It depends, yeah. I mean, data centers that a customer might want 3 data centers. Obviously, to reduce the latency, they might be within 70 kilometers of each other. One falls down, the other one's backed it up. It's customer requirements, really. But they're normally built in small clusters so that the connectivity is low latency.
And also, I would like to add what Chris mentioned on the green initiative. That's yes, it's easier to get a renewable energy actually if you are going to Jakarta Greater area. But of course, it will highly depends on the power supplier.
Okay.
Meaning that there's several IPP, the private electricity company, that's already able to provide the renewable energy, even though it's only a small capacity. While for our main power supply here in Indonesia, still they can only give the REC, the renewable energy certificate, meaning that they are offsetting it. But if you are looking more deeper on whether we can get the exactly the route from the green power source, it's very difficult. It's very challenging here in Indonesia. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult in the data center market to meet the Indonesian government's commitments to a green country.
Correct.
Are we enough in those kind of commitment, but in your perspective?
No, there's a long way to go.
There's a long way
There's
to
a
go.
long way to go. And that's not just Indonesia. That's worldwide,
Worldwide.
isn't it? We've got a long way to go on it. But here, coal is obviously the main supply.
source.
So that source, you've got to replace it with something. Whether it's hydro, wind, solar. That's what's got to be looked into in the future.
Okay. And also the small space of data centers is also to attract the local players also. Pak Steph, is it
Yes.
going
Yes,
to be
indeed.
there? Or?
Yes.
Yeah. So not only the
big
big players now,
Yes.
but also the locals understanding that they need the data center maybe in the small space.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So we heard about the green data centers also, slightly comment. But for Pak Chris, what is also the key challenges in the project management, specifically to the construction? You understand the permit before, but you also telling about the lead time and then the power itself. Is it true that data centers, once you turn on, you cannot turn off? Is it supposed to be working 24 hours forever?
Yeah, but that's why we have distributed redundant systems.
Okay.
So you have 2 diverse power supplies, A and B HV, A and B switchgear, A and B power in-lamp rack power. So the idea is you can always switch from one power source to the other. So
Okay.
don't let anyone tell you that you cannot turn the power off the data centers because there's maintenance to do, there's upgrades, you might have a data center with 10 halls in there, you've only fitted out 2 halls. At some point, you're going to have to isolate the HV, to connect onto. But as long as it's designed correctly, then there's no problem. So,
As long as the design is correctly.
yeah. So, and that is.
Is it happening, Pak, in your perspective?
It is happening, yeah. I mean, the designers that we've used are global designers anyway. So they've done data centers in Singapore, China, in the West.
Yeah.
So.
Are you new in data centers? This course is for you. You'll uncover the fundamental principles and guidelines essential for constructing a top-notch data center. Scan QR code below to register.
you need to use a simplified design,
Correct.
you know, and it will work. It may cost a little bit more, but you know, you have to offer the customer this distributed redundancy because that's what they want. There's also, if you don't, you'll get hammered by your SLAs from your client. You know, you're supposed to give them 99.999% power, cooling, humidity. If you can't do that, your customer is going to come back to you with heavy penalties.
Heavy penalties.
Heavy penalties, and they do.
Yeah.
You are smiling a lot, Pak.
Yeah,
You want to add?
I strongly agree with that design, and
Okay.
that comes the problems actually. Even we wish that the design is perfect, but in the realization is also challenging. There's a lot of variables that can happen actually during the project or the construction of data center. The easiest part is on the core and shell. Usually it is the easiest part, yeah. But when we would like to bring all those mechanical and electrical equipments, then the challenges will come. The real challenges will come.
The real came, yeah.
Exactly. One of the problem, for example, like although we already procure those equipments and it's already been promised to deliver in certain times, sometimes it could happen that, the material is not ready or the price is going up. So meaning in the middle of project, you need to do something. You need to find a way out on how we can find an alternative solution while at the same time we need to compromise with our budget to meet the budget and also the timeline.
Correct.
That's the real challenges. We need to do the value engineering. We always say that right, Chris? The value engineering. And having said that, when we performing this value engineering, doesn't mean it's an easy way. You will find few options while you still need to discuss internally, including you may also need to discuss with your investors.
Okay.
While your investor is not an engineer, right?
I mean,
They're
that's
only
where,
concerned about the cost.
Timeline, the cost, and the
timeline.
BEP.
Yeah, but that's where a good project management team comes in. That they're there to mitigate any of these problems. I mean, the problems that we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years with the pandemic. I mean, serious delays on deliveries, port congestion, you know, customs import sign off, and we've really had to rack our brains and think outside the box to keep the project going, and then to fit in deliveries that are coming in at a later stage, and that's where a good project team comes in. And they'll get you through it. You might lose a bit of time, but you know, and what Stephanus said, always keep the customer informed. Never lie to the customer.
Communications.
Because you'll find, I know they've all got the deadlines, but they understand what's going on in the world. Yeah, and if you communicate with your customer and you're honest, they will then more than likely work with you to get through it. You know, they'll be asking the questions. Well, what can you do? Can you work on this bit? Can we do this? You know, can you give me this?
Yeah.
You know, instead of giving me all of this, can you just give me this so I can get, you know? So communication is a great thing.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
it's a crucial. Yes, right.
But the other thing that the customer will not allow us to increase the price.
No.
Even though it needs 2 years or 3 years, the cost is fixed.
The cost is fixed.
The cost is
Always
fixed.
fixed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Always fixed.
It's the program that will make or break the data center for the developer. Because if it's late, it's going to cost money. There's not only the SLA, the penalties from the customer because you're late delivering. They've got their customers they need to get in. They've got a whole worldwide network that needs to be hooked up. So they're going to be angry. They're going to be raising costs against you. You've then, as a developer, you've got additional costs, design costs, professional team costs, which you have to pay for, you know. And if that program keeps slipping, you're still paying these people, but you're not going to get any money from anybody.
Yeah. Delay on the revenue.
Yeah.
So that's also a big problem for
Yeah.
the operators.
Delay on the revenue
Yeah.
should be cannot do.
No.
And the other one on managing the costs, yeah, it's also affected by the selection of the contractors and subcontractors and also the consultant. If you are willing to pay a lot of money, then you can get the most prominent
Building
operators. Also, I mean the
Contractors,
contractors,
yeah.
and then you can sleep, right?
Oh, well, yeah.
But you need to balance that, right? You need to balance between your budget and then also the price that you would like to sell to the market, and then how to do the selection of the contractor and subcontractors.
Yeah, and that takes us back to when we were talking about skill sets over here.
All
You know, do you pay more money and get an external contractor? You know, I mean, everybody's aware there's a lot of external contractors now coming over from China, Japan, Singapore, who have got good experience on data centers. You will pay a premium for it, but you're more than likely going to get it delivered on schedule. You know, and you use a local contractor. They do not understand the technical build. They've not got it yet, and they need to understand it. Hotels are easy, repetitive. You know, shopping malls are simple, repetitive. You know, but a data center, when you hand that data center over, everything has to be complete, operational, tested, signed off. You can't hand it over in bits and pieces like you could hand over a shopping centre. You know, it all has to go. So it's, you know, you have to pay a bit more money, and you will get program certainty.
Correct.
Because it is program that will blow your budget every time.
Yeah, that's the fact.
Yeah.
That's the fact.
Yeah. You can have the cleverest QS team, cost management team, but if your project management team can't deliver it on time, you're blown, and it's not.
You blowing your reputation also as a contractor?
Yeah, because you know the customers. It's a very small industry,
It's a small industry.
and if you delayed on one,
You
it
cannot
soon
get another job.
It soon gets round. Yeah, it soon gets round.
And
you
the
know.
customer can change to another
To
operators.
another operators. It's very crucial.
And sometimes it's so also difficult for us, excuse me, to make a decision on that, right? Sometimes we felt that okay, what I need is to put strong key people to lead this project. However, when we are facing the projects itself and running the projects, you always need to depend on those workers, okay, on the locals, which is as mentioned by Chris, that it's a lack of skill, right? It's lack of discipline, and they know they are not aware on what is the critical and on doing the right things, and with the right work sequence.
Yeah.
So that kind of things could make the project delivery be a lot of problems. Sometimes that's those people on these those contractors or subcontractors trying to don't worry, Chris, we'll do that, we'll achieve that, we'll promise you.
Yeah.
But being an expert, Chris already knows that this kind of sequence, it doesn't make any sense. It will make delays, and Chris will asking back to the contractors or subcontractors, okay, what is your exact your plan on how to meet the timeline,
To
while
speed
at the
up
same
the
time.
process.
Yeah.
Exactly. But we do understand that it's a bit difficult. It's very challenging on doing that. But always the subcontractors or contractors saying that no worries, Mr. Chris,
We will
make this
handle
happen.
it.
Yeah.
And
it's-
sometimes they can make it happen,
Okay.
But there's a
Surprisingly.
lot of punch list, right, Chris? There's a lot of homework after they deliver the projects that we need to fix that.
Yeah, there's only so many workers you can get on a site, and the work has to be done in the correct sequence. Otherwise, it'll fail in commissioning. You know, but I've worked with contractors you know, they've worked extended hours through the night, splitting, and you have to think about it, how you can actually, okay, so we all need to work in the data hall, but we've got to prepare the floor, so we've got to put the epoxy down. Okay, so you need to sequence the works. So they do the epoxy flooring overnight, leave it a couple of days, and do that. And it's all that sort of thinking that can speed up the process,
process.
or pull some time back as well.
And while at the same time, we need to put a highest priority on safety, right, Chris?
Yes.
the
We would
same
like
time, yeah.
all those people to be safe to get home to their family safely. Then it's very challenging. You know, we need to put a lot of people, a lot of safety and health people to you know
Yeah.
to monitor,
To monitor.
all the process
And at the
to make
same
sure
time
that
to
it's-
keep up the timeline,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
Because not only that, the practice is having those people, those workers, to get home to their family safely, but we would like also to avoid there's an impact to the workers that can affect or stop the projects, right?
Correct.
Meaning that there is more delays.
To all of viewers and also listeners, audience, we are telling before that the lead time is quite crucial. So there is a data from JLL. So in 2021, the equipment lead time increasing 3 until 5 times in the past 6 months. So I will tell you this one example. There is a categories coming from generators and enclosure. So the previous standard lead time is 10 until 12 weeks. But because of the perhaps the pandemic and also the delays in the supply chain, it become the 50 plus weeks. So if we divide it by 4 weeks per month, it will be taking a year. So for example, if you are ordering generators in January, we will get also the items in January, but next year. So it will passing one New Year's, yeah, to just getting those items. But typically in data centers, the construction takes 2 years. So Pak Chris and also Pak Steph is telling us to how to navigate and mitigate this kind of the problems during the communications and also somehow changing the contractors. That's a very crucial to get working with the contractors. But for from your experience, Pak Chris, is it happening? The delay is happening during the pandemic, and what is your suggestion to overcome this situation? Basically, from your previous experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, during the pandemic, the supply chain was seriously affected.
Seriously.
Globally, materials were scarce, and you're right. Delivery times did increase. I mean, even post pandemic now, as we say, Schneider is still quoting probably 18 months for a chiller because of the backlog. You know, there's microchips in everything, you know, and they're quite sparse at the moment as well.
Okay.
But to mitigate it, you have to get, if you've got a standard design and you know what equipment you need, you can get that procured early, and then it's got to be built into the program. You know, you work with the LLE vendors, you book the manufacturing slots early, you book the testing slots, and then also you have to look about where you're going to procure it from.
So
Are you
the
gonna go-
forecast to procure is really crucial
Yes.
during the pandemic.
Yeah. And then where you get it from. Is it?
Is it through sea
Is it-
shipment or by air shipment? Sometimes
Yeah,
it's
you
crucial
know, I
also.
mean, yeah. My company on the last one, most of the LLE came from Europe. You're looking 3 months shipping.
Just for the shipment, 3 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Then you got your customs clearance.
Correct. Another
Yeah.
bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Oh, correct.
You know, and that's if without the pandemic, when the ships couldn't even get into ports, or they couldn't even get a container, to put the thing on the ship. So there's a fine balance. Do we look locally, which I can get quicker and probably a little bit cheaper?
Okay.
Or do we go for tried and tested from the West? You know? And that's a big thing on data centers. And going back to the same point as well, are the people skilled enough locally to actually manufacture these components? And I think the problem with Indonesia is you don't manufacture. Very little manufacturing is done. Every time, we had a procurement delay on my last project, it was just, oh, it's coming from Singapore, oh, it's coming from China, oh, it's coming from here. Simple things, general day-to-day steel, electrical cabling, copper pipes. It's got to be shipped in from abroad. Why can that not be done over here? Why can it not be made over here?
Yeah. Procure locally will be helpful.
Yeah.
But it's not happening at that time.
No. So the only way to mitigate that is upfront procurement. And you can only do that. You've got to get your design correct to stage 4, so that you can actually put a bill of quants together. That has to go out to the main contractor, to the LLE vendors. Main contractor then needs to go out to his subcontractors, mechanical, electrical, fire, chillers, HVAC. All that has to be vetted and checked by the QS team and the cost management team. Once that's done, procurement should start. And on my last project, that didn't happen. Everybody knew we were in a pandemic, but nobody seemed over here to have the urgency to pre-order. And that's the difficulty. You've got a good team and a good contractor. They know when that item has got to be installed, how long it's going to take to deliver, how long it's going to take to manufacture. So you order it, you get everything ordered, and then you're mitigating a lot of problems from your program.
Okay, let me also give from the review on that part, especially on the LLE, Chris. As we may know that the LLE is the most significant cost related to the projects, right? It's maybe about 70% plus of the total projects. As the data center player, from the business perspective, it's also very challenging for us to define exactly on how we would like to put a plan on deliver all those equipments, the LLE equipments. For example, if we build a 50 megawatts data center, it doesn't mean that on day one we will put for the capacity as much as 50 megawatts. We may start it with 5 megawatts or 10 megawatts and increase gradually. While when we do the procurement and do the negotiation, of course, all those vendors would like to have a commitment from us.
Correct.
If you want to buy the 50 megawatt, then say now. Then you get a good price. But we cannot do that. We always said, okay, that's our plan. And when they ask about the plan, yes, our plan is like this, but we don't have any firm commitment on that. Right? It will depend highly from the market or from the customers. If we can get the customer earlier that already commit for 50 megawatt, then it's easier. It makes everything easier.
So it's always waiting until the tenant
Exactly.
ends?
So that's the challenges.
Right? It's funding as well, isn't it?
Exactly. It's also the funding.
Most of these data centers work on borrowed money. Technology is moving all the time. And we have to strive to save this planet. If we continue the way we're going, we will destroy this planet.
I cannot check out my Shopee, and then this because of the data center is having a fire accident there.
Enjoyed this podcast? Take it with you on the go.
Find us on Spotify and never miss an episode. Just search for Nusantara Academy on Spotify and hit follow. Happy listening! Let's connect with fellow data center industry expert. Join our community at Lincoln Nusantara Digital Community to collaborate, share insights, and stay informed about the digital world right now.